Brandon Braga. No one asked for these salamanders. No one needs these salamanders. We don't understand. Why? Why?
Back.
Hey everybody, welcome to Into the Wormhole with Larissa and Lauren. I am Larissa Maestro and I'm here with my number one,
Lauren Lowen. Hello.
Yay!
All right, man, Larissa, what do we have in store for listeners today?
So I hope everyone is drunk because we're about to talk about the worst episode of Voyager. And maybe like one of the most worst episodes of Star Trek.
I was going to say in my research, it comes up a lot as perhaps the worst of Voyager, but also one of the worst of just Star Trek history in general.
Yeah. This is not my favorite episode. This episode is so bad that before we ever started our podcast, both of our siblings, independently of each other, contacted us and were like, "Can you please watch Threshold and talk about it?"
Yes, I think we could say names, or maybe we shouldn't to protect the innocent.
Oh no,
yeah,
I'm gonna say her name.
Your sister Amanda and my brother John. And it's kind of interesting because Amanda is a tried and true Star Trek fan for years, and my brother watched TNG with me when we were kids, and he's watched some of Deep Space Nine, but he's definitely not to the level of Trek fandom as I would say you and I are, or your sister.
Yeah.
But because of quarantine and because of our podcast and you specifically, he was inspired to just watch all of Voyager. So he has a friend who has mentioned things, you know, when somebody's like, "Oh, it's the dinosaur episode," or "It's the Space Salamander episode." I think a lot of people call this the Space Salamander episode.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so for him, this is a recent thing. And he mentioned it because before he watched it, he said, "Oh, isn't there like a Space Salamander episode? Are you going to talk about that?" And then once he actually saw it, it quickly changed to, "You guys got to talk about Threshold." Oh my gosh.
So my sister, I think this is when we were first talking about doing the podcast maybe, or we had decided officially we were doing it. I think this was January of this past year. And I went to visit her at the time. She was living in Utah and she brought it up. And then in the months following that, she would like send me a meme about it, or she went to the zoo with my nephew and they saw two large lizard things and she took a video of it and was like, "Look, it's Janeway and Paris." Like, it's been an ongoing joke. So I feel like this is a long time coming, because I also kind of feel like maybe we watched it for the first time together and we were both like, "What the fuck was that?"
That's a proper reaction to this episode.
Yes.
I feel like I might be imagining this, but I feel like your sister has a more sentimental or finds this episode a little more endearing.
Yeah,
or am
maybe.
I completely wrong on that?
I feel like maybe she does. My sister likes body horror stuff. So my sister enjoys scary movies and like gross sci-fi makeup, gross like horror makeup, that kind of stuff. She loves that shit. So this episode is sort of, other than the fact that it's like written horribly, she like those things are very much catered to the kind of media that she likes anyway. So
for her, is this like a guilty pleasure episode? Or,
oh yeah,
'cause I think for my brother, this is just like, this is a bad episode and I'm glad I saw it once, but I never want to see it again.
Yes. For her, I think this is a guilty pleasure episode.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a little story to tell. I made a mistake, and I made Dan watch this episode with me, and I think he might have sworn off of all Star Trek for the rest of his life.
I tried to get Keith to watch it with me, and the timing just didn't work out. But his kind of thing is he will watch any TNG episode, but once you get out of TNG, not so much.
Yeah, probably not.
And this one, I really wanted him to watch it with me because I really wanted his reaction, but it was just not meant to be. But part of me was worried he'd just be like, okay, well, I don't have to see any other outside TNG episodes ever. And it sounds like maybe that happened with Dan.
Yeah.
Okay, well, tell me, what was his reaction besides it's bad?
Hated it. First of all, he was like, this guy is the worst actor I've ever seen.
like
Robert Duncan McNeil.
Oh,
I know. Well, he doesn't have like a relationship with this character. Like, as far as like Trek goes, we've watched together original series movies, TNG and TNG movies. Like, we have never watched any other Star Trek together. Oh, that's not true. And Picard. We watched Picard together.
Okay. So was this Dan's first Voyager?
Yeah, it was
experience?
bad. I probably should not have made him watch that one. We totally, like, he got mad.
He wants his 45 minutes back.
He literally does. He wants them back.
Also, did we even mention, we keep saying, like, this is the worst episode. We're watching Voyager's Threshold.
Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
Season 2.
Episode 15.
Wow.
Yay! So yeah, let me do a quick recap. Tom Paris has a theory, or there's a theory about Warp 10, that when you cross the threshold into Warp 10, that you can exist in every part of the universe. So there's the potential that if Voyager is able to break the warp barrier, they could be home in a split second. So they try it out in the holodeck. They weirdly get a good idea from Neelix and fix a problem they have, and then they do a test run and it works out. So they put Tom in a shuttle and they put him into space to break the warp barrier, right? I don't really understand why they couldn't do this remotely somehow, or like figure out how to not have a person in the shuttle. But that's neither here nor there, nor everywhere in the universe. So Tom gets in the shuttle, breaks the warp barrier, disappears. They're like, where'd he go? Somehow comes back, appears off the bow of the ship, but they beam him in and looks like he's fine. And they're like, wow, this is so exciting. History's been made. And then he starts evolving into a different creature. Slowly or quickly, depending on what part of the episode we're in, his hands get all weird. His veins start showing in his face. He starts becoming crazy, basically, and manic. His brain starts to expand and starts to bubble and like expand and contract. It's really disgusting. His skin starts to fall off. He pulls his tongue out of his mouth. His hair falls out, and then he kidnaps Captain Janeway after running into her in in a turbo lift, and then takes her back onto the shuttle, breaks the warp barrier again, and disappears. Voyager finally finds them later. They've both become basically what look like large cave salamanders with the external gills on the side. They have mated, had tiny babies who run away. They leave the babies on the planet. They bring Janeway and Paris back to Voyager and then somehow magically turn them back into people. They acknowledge that they had sex, and then the episode is over.
Hey, good job. That's perfect.
Yeah, there we go. That is Threshold.
So Larissa and I thought one of the best things to do now is we wanted to share a couple of comments or questions from our siblings, since they were the motivator for this episode. So we gave him a little homework. We gave John and Amanda some homework and said, please send us 2 to 3 comments, observations, or questions, and then we're going to kind of riff on that. And we're going to kind of go ahead and share what they sent us first. And then from there, we will proceed with our review and our reactions. Do you want to go first? Because I love it. You said Amanda and her husband actually sent you a 10-minute long video.
Yes.
They did their own podcast episode.
My sister and Zach, my brother-in-law, Zach sort of got like roped into this, it seems like, because at the beginning of the video, my sister's like, what did you think? And he's like, I haven't had my coffee yet. I didn't know we were doing this right now.
Is he a fan too? I forget.
He is a fan. He and my sister are both big fans of Star Trek. But the first question that they had, or that my sister had, was, what do you think Tom Paris's personnel review was like that year? Basically, she was like, do you think they ever talked about it again? And I was like, no, I don't think so. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like one of those, cool, next episode, never talking about this again.
Right.
Her other questions were, was their whole conversation at the end of the episode appropriate at all, or completely inappropriate? And then her third question was, what the fuck happened to the babies? They just left the babies?
Ooh, yeah.
They just left the babies on the planet. What?
Okay. So those were hers, right?
Those were her questions, yeah.
Okay. My brother John and her overlapped a little bit. So Here was John's reaction. His first one's just a statement, by the way.
I love this so much.
Summarize this. My comment is that if Star Trek was a religion, Threshold would give me a crisis of faith. And then
same, John,
for
same.
You and Larissa. It certainly happened to Dan, it sounds like.
Yes.
Questions. Number 1. Which actually, I'm really excited to talk about this. But what is the moral in Warp 10 causing humans to turn into space salamanders? A very worthwhile question, which we'll get into. 2, is Chakotay guilty of child abandonment for leaving the offspring behind?
Here,
The
yes.
doctor could have turned them into humans as well. And then 3, would Voyager have been a better show if the entire crew had traveled at Warp 10 and they all turned into space salamanders? Think of the possibilities. Which I will say, if you kind of want to see an episode where the whole crew starts to mutate, watch TNG Genesis, which is like season 6 or season 7. It's towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's kind of another fun, like, what the hell is happening?
If you want to see a character grow gills and not be confused about why they look like a blind cave salamander, you can see that happen to Deanna Troi, where she still looks like Deanna Troi, but with gills.
Well, there you go. So man, like, where do we start?
I mean, do you want to start with the place they crossed over, which is, I mean, what happened to the babies?
Yeah. Oh, you mean where they overlapped?
Yeah. The place where
I've seen other fans bring that up too, where it's like, oh, there's literally a line that they're like, we decided to leave the offspring on their new world, and that gets brought up a lot. My brother brought up
Chakotay actually says natural habitat, which I was like,
they
don't have a natural habitat. They're literally new life.
And I know you've brought up before that that's one of like Star Trek's missions is to discover new life. So I heard you in my head saying, bring them on the ship. That's literally what you're out here for, even though you're trying to get home.
Yeah.
My question is, they went to this planet and it's uninhabited. I'm guessing they mean by, any sort of alien humanoid life form as sophisticated as them. But I'm like, do they have food? Like, will they survive? And also the question is like, I think in my notes I just wrote, bye kids, like time
Right?
to inbreed, I guess. There's only 3 of you.
Yeah, I thought about that too. Like, what happens to the gene pool? Like, what the hell? Also, do they have no like emotions about it? They're just like, yeah, never thought I would have kids that are now out there just alone on a planet. They're
And
just like,
I
it's
think
done.
my brother brought up a point that I've seen before too, where if mommy and daddy had the human DNA and they were able just to bloop, like turn them back, couldn't you theoretically do that with the kids? Because they would also have human DNA,
Right?
and then you'd have like the Borg kids and the Salamander kids, and they could play together in later seasons.
We'd have a bigger school. We'd have a bigger nursery. Naomi Wildman could have a friend so much earlier.
See, so I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I mean, very little about this episode makes sense to me. So, so I don't really. I mean, them leaving the babies on that planet makes no sense to me. Also, the fact that like they do look very comfortable on that planet. It looks like they evolved to live on a planet like that, which also doesn't make sense since the evolution was spurred by the warp 10 threshold barrier breaking thing and not by like being on a particular planet. I
guess it's one of those instincts things that they're, like Tom just knew that's where they need to go.
Yeah, I
It's
guess.
really convenient that it was
very
only 3 days away.
Right,
Yeah.
very convenient that it was so nearby, that there was a planet like that so nearby. Also, from what I know of evolution, and I literally looked them up because they had these cave salamanders were definitely the inspiration for the creature design for the Janeway Paris final salamanders. But if you look up cave salamander on the internet, you'll find a little like whitish, pinkish, blind salamander that lives in the depths of caves and has these external gills on either side that kind of look like little pink tree branches. And these salamanders have those things. They're very slow. They're blind, but they're like, they have like specific adaptations for their environment. And this seems like a step backward, or I was like, are we going in circles as we evolve? Like, are we, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, why would they choose something that already exists in a less sophisticated life form on our current planet, other than the fact that like they couldn't think of something else?
Well, and that's kind of interesting because when I definitely in this episode wanted to see how much got, no pun intended, mutated in the rewrite process.
Oh, yeah.
And see, like, what did we start with compared to what did we end with? And see how many things changed and, oh, this writer did this and stuff. And Brandon, I'm trying to find his name in the memory alpha notes.
Brandon Braga.
Braga, thank you. I don't have to say it very often. It's one of those names I read all the time.
Yeah.
But he wanted the idea of evolution kind of working in a circle.
Oh, he did. Okay, so I got
So
that from it.
It's great that you mentioned Amanda and Body Horror because he was definitely inspired by David Cronenberg. Hello, listener. This is Lauren with a quick editor's note. I mentioned filmmaker David Cronenberg several times this episode, but I unfortunately call him David Cronenberg. Oops. And now back to our episode. I think we're going to have to get into Body Horror to really get into the nooks and crannies of this episode. But he also wanted to make it a comment, much of a sci-fi comment about what would happen if you went to Warp 10 and the idea if you can be everywhere at once, future, the past, if you're, maybe evolution is more of a reset and a loop rather than becoming sort of a sci-fi trope of like, you're a glowy being with a big brain.
Right.
Yeah, so he definitely
you
had
fall in
that,
love with
and
Beverly Crusher, and then you turn into a blinding orb of light and fly into the abyss.
And so he one of his frustrations with this episode is that he didn't really get to throw in a conversation kind of hammering that point more or getting that point across. Although I feel like with the cave salamanders, as you said, we kind of get that idea. Like they're evolving, but they're evolving, de-evolving at the same time.
Yeah.
You know?
Like, forward
feeling.
is backwards is forward is backwards if you're on a circle.
And I think that's one of the problems with this episode is that I think there is a definite struggle between the sci-fi mission that Brandon Braga was on versus kind of more of this Tom Paris body horror story.
Yeah. It kind of, it was like, make up your mind what is happening here. Like also like mid episode there's that lieutenant that ends up trying to join the Kazon later. Like there's that
tiny
tiny
like Eddington.
No, that's Eddington is the guy
no.
from same sort of deal. Eddington's on DS9 and he defected from
right.
Federation.
It's Michael Eddington, right?
And I remember that because he's obsessed with Les Mis, as am I.
Oh.
But this dude, I forget what his name is, but he's like there's just one like tiny ass scene that doesn't need to be in there where he's like talking to a Kazon guy and he's like, "Hey, I've got all the info from the Warp 10 flight." And then it's that's it.
Yeah, does that ever go anywhere in another episode? Because in
does.
general, I kind of skip the Kazon episodes when I go back to Voyager.
Yeah, understandable. But yes, it does come back in a later
Warp 10.
episode.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think that it becomes specifically about Warp 10. It just becomes a story more about that lieutenant defecting because he doesn't believe they're going to get back home. So there was that like awkwardness in the writing, and it also is so slow. This episode it feels so like trudgy. He spends an entire episode like slowly losing his skin and pulling his tongue out and being really weird.
Which I actually don't mind. Like I love the idea of a Star Trek body horror episode. I'm one of those weirdos where I don't like watching horror movies.
Me either. I hate it. I hate them.
But I'm fascinated by them because of the kind of themes that they work with and the imaginations that these writers go through. So I'm one of those people that I love reading about horror movies on like Wikipedia. Like I want to know what happens and kind of when other people dissect them. And so there's actually quite a few horror movies and, body horror elements or, kind of cult films that I'm aware of, even though I won't watch them. And so
yeah, I'm totally 100% on the same page.
Yeah, and so this is kind of like body horror light.
It is
but again, it like for me it totally loses its bite once they're trying to correct him in the warp core.
Yeah, what?
Like once he turns into generic sci-fi amphibian creature, the episode loses its bite. Like
yes.
I think it's far more interesting when he's just basically mutating and falling apart.
Yeah.
And he's
Do you
still
think that's because all of a sudden he doesn't have any teeth and his head is kind of cute?
And he has no nose.
He has no nose.
Yeah, I mean, well, like let's bring up, for instance, The Fly.
Yeah.
Like obviously, The Fly is a book. It was turned into a old B movie, and then it was remade in the 80s. It's done by David Cronenberg, which I said was for Braga like a huge influence in this episode. So I think we kind of have to talk about it since he cites this.
Yeah.
And David Cronenberg by no means invented body horror, but he's probably one of the more recognizable names for people just walking down the street.
Yeah.
A lot of people wouldn't be as familiar with body horror genre, but if you told them, hey, The Fly with Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum in the 80s, it was a huge film, they'd be like, oh, okay, gotcha. It's that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But for instance, in the very end, Jeff Goldblum doesn't turn into a fly. He turns into this horrible mutation of this hybrid human fly. He turns into this own grotesque mutation. And I think one of the things for Tom is like by the end, he and Janeway literally turn into, like you said, these cave salamanders that really exist.
Yeah.
And so it takes it very much into a sci-fi realm of, I mean, it's like if I walked in and you were just like a cat, like
right?
next to Walt, and I'd be like, oh, Larissa's a cat now.
And I would probably be fine.
You'd be like, I'm good.
I'd be like, this is me now.
Sorry if I'm getting in a tangent, but I can't.
No, this is interesting because I mean, I was more focused on like how this episode's terrible.
Well, it is for me. It's funny. I got like very academic about this once I started going into it, and I was like, interesting.
I love that you did. I love it.
Yes, I'm fascinated by this. But so if you just go on Wikipedia, if you don't know what body horror is, like I said, probably some two more recognizable ones to the average bear would be The Fly, and then The Thing, which I know you have seen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is a great little sci-fi movie. Who did that one? John Carpenter, right?
Yeah.
John Carpenter. Yeah.
Yep.
Duh. Another great one of Kurt Russell. That's like a good one, I think, to step into.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of if you're getting into the genre. But like if you go to Wikipedia, the definition defines body horror as a subgenre of horror that intentionally showcases graphic or psychologically disturbing violations of the human body. And that's probably a good way to describe it. And movies like that, you'll have disease, zombification, mutilation, mutations. It's just very disturbing variations of your body or other people's body. And I think one of the things that's really frightening about body horror is that I wrote down, it's disturbing because you lose logic and agency over your body and also your relationship to the world around you, whether that's the physical relationship or like when Tom like can't breathe because his lungs are mutating, or you just don't know how to relate to the humans around you. Yeah. So there's a sort of this detachment, which is very alarming. And I think with body horror, there is a huge psychological fear that comes from it. Yeah. And that psychological fear for this episode, I think, is explored in the first part where he's kind of becoming deranged. What probably my favorite scene is the one where he's talking to Janeway. Yeah. And he kind of keeps flipping back and forth between, like being obviously kind of almost gone and like these thoughts of being superior and saying like, well, how do you know what's happening to me isn't better than you? And like yo-yos between that and him being like, I'm sorry, I'm not myself, like please help me, I'm scared. I kind of feel like that's my favorite moment in the whole episode. And so you're kind of riding this wave of that, and then once, like I said, he just turns into generic sci-fi salamander man. Right. It's like, oh, okay, well, we're now to just a kind of more generic Star Trek alien-esque character, and now he's going to turn into a lizard. Whereas, like you were talking about Genesis and Troy with the gills and stuff, that episode, I think, keeps it in this area where they don't let everyone just mutate into like it's like they don't walk into a room and it's like, oh, they're a chimp now. Here, come on. Let's take your hand and walk you through the ship. Right. Absolutely. Yeah, like Barclay is half spider, and when he like pops up, you're like, oh my God, I love that.
I love it. Yeah, my other thing about it is that like there is a threshold that Tom Paris's character crosses in which he is now no longer Tom Paris and he's following instincts and he's just now lizard thing. And at that point it's like I don't even care.
Yeah, no,
you know, like I don't care anymore. I am also like, I mean, I guess it couldn't have been anyone else, but like there's part of me that's like not sure that like Paris was the right choice for this thing. Like it all feels shoehorned in to me.
I was thinking about that too, because, and this might go to my brother's first real question, which was like, what's the moral story about Tom turning into the salamander character and going into, warp 10? And I agree. It's like this story, if I had to describe it to someone, is like a Icarus story. It's a cautionary tale. It's like Icarus flew too close to the sun and is now paying the consequences.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to Tom until they kind of take a strong left into more of just like the sci-fi evolution thing.
Yeah. I was about to say, be careful what you wish for. You might become a lizard.
And I mean, that's what you see, like, again, talking about Cronenberg's The Fly, you know, he's a little careless. He's a little egotistical, and there's consequences because of that. And actually, I have to give Robert Duncan McNeil credit because he read the script and was like, what the fuck is this? And so he says, what is this about? Before you can even start to tell the story, you have to find the moral. What is the simplest point of this episode? Once you say that in a sentence, then that is what the episode is about. To me, the whole Warp 10 challenge and salamanders and all of that frosting was about Paris trying to find some sort of salvation outside himself and ultimately realizing that he had to find his own self-worth from within. So I have to give him credit. Like, as an actor, I think he realized that he needed to find Tom somewhere in the story. And,
yeah,
you know, he could only work with so much. But to me, it's like, you don't really need all that giant salamander stuff at the end. I think it's more about just Tom facing these horrible consequences.
Yes.
And then, yeah.
I'm like, why, for the love of God, why? Like, what? Like, if the story is about Tom needs to find something in himself, inside himself, to be happy and content and to live the life he should live, but in order to get there, he has to become a salamander first.
Yeah.
Like, no.
I think also I was thinking about this, about the question of like, does it have to be Tom? You know, they've had episodes where stuff has happened to kind of random. I'm thinking of Meld, the one where there's a serial killer. And the Betazoid.
Yeah.
You know, like, they have things where they just have, or actually, like, one of my favorites of Voyager is Ashes to Ashes with the Lindsay, like the random female.
Yeah. Oh, I love
person.
That episode.
I know. I mean, it's not like the best episode of the world, but
I love that episode.
Yeah. And again, it's just like a random character, but I really liked what they did with her. I almost wish this was done with somebody who is a non-essential Voyager character, and just have this cautionary tale of him going full, you know, not salamander, but just like gone,
right?
And him dying in the end, honestly, and them just being like, oh shit, maybe we should do Warp 10.
Yeah. So Dan, this is his first experience with Voyager, so like he didn't know. He was like, how many of these people are main characters? And I was like, all of them. Sorry. And he was like,
and then he cried.
He was like, so this dude's not gonna die? Is he gonna die? He should die. He needs to die. Just die. And then at one point he was like, rip off your ear.
Oh, I thought that was gonna happen.
No, and he was like, rip off your ear. And he didn't know that there was a tongue ripping out scene later. But I was like, oh, okay, that might be like the only part of this episode that you enjoy.
The episode is like, hold my beer.
Hold my beer, ripping out my tongue. Also, this episode won an Emmy for makeup.
I'm actually okay with that.
Yeah.
The scene where the head bulging when he's talking to Janeway,
that's
is
the moment.
Legitimately creepy, and I noticed it. And
yes.
It's great because it's not overdone. You kind of get a few minutes into the scene until you're like, oh God, his head
is it moving?
Bulging and pulsating.
Ew. Yeah. It's disgusting. It's so disgusting. It's just, I'm going to preface my next comment this way, which is that there are a lot of horror episodes of Star Trek out there. And I do enjoy a lot of them as someone who's not a fan of horror at all. Like, I tend to get really like emotionally affected by the media I consume. I tend to like have nightmares for long periods of time after seeing something scary. Like, especially if it's like really, really well woven, because it's like woven to like infect your psyche basically, and to like make you feel awful. And I hate that. But this episode doesn't do any of that for me. And it makes me upset because there's so many elements, like a lot of the stuff that you brought up with the psychological effects of a transformation like that, the things that body horror as a genre can do really well, it doesn't do any of those things. It's just it falls short. And like what that says to me is that it could have been good, but it isn't. Like, and not, and you know, we say a lot of this regularly, that like we love Star Trek does a lot of things great, and sometimes it just falls short. And this is like, this doesn't just fall short. This falls into a category of like, what the fuck were you thinking? For me personally, this falls into the category of I don't understand like who let this get made. In a lot of ways, I could literally just never watch this episode again, and I would be fine. But you know, I probably will, because it happens. Also, at the same time, like on paper, in some ways, this has all of the elements that like attract me to sci-fi in general. It's got the like bonkers sci-fi premise that is like, you know, not possible in the time that we live in now. It's imaginative. It's like, it's so far out there, and all of those things I'm attracted to. But it's just no.
I think I've been thinking about this. It's almost like, in a way, they wanted their A story and B story to be the emotional journey of Tom, and then more of the sci-fi logical transformation. This is what's happening. This is the sci-fi thing. Explanation of why it's happening and how we fix it. And they, like some of the other episodes, were hoping it would dovetail nicely, and it doesn't. Like instead, you just have two unsatisfying premises that both just kind of flop at the end. And this should have been one where they should have, you know, picked a lane.
Yeah. They're just like, this episode is all over the fucking place, because like the beginning of it is also like sweet little moment in the mess hall and Neelix saves the day, dude. Like it sets it up to be like la 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 da da da, like, and then it just spirals into sci-fi nonsense. You know what I mean? Like the tone that they set up is like, so, I mean,
they just kind of switch horses like midway through. And
they really
like,
do.
Oh, okay.
They really do. It's a yeah.
And I think what you know happens again in body horror and just movies in general is that fear of the unknown is a great vessel to explore other themes and just put a plot. Like if you think about, again, going back to John Carpenter's The Thing, we never get like crazy concrete answers, but we don't need them. I mean, think about like even Alien and Aliens, where it was just Ripley shows up. There are these scary aliens, which that movie was inspired by like slasher films. Mm-hmm. And that's the crazy thing about, I mean, that's the great thing about a good slasher film, especially those old school ones, is that we don't need like a 20-minute scene that goes into the explanation of like, well, this is the killer's background. And I mean, I know those franchises eventually did, but like, that's what's so terrifying, is just like this unknown force that's out to get you.
Yeah.
It's like Jaws. It's
like
Jaws.
Yeah,
Jaws
exactly.
Is just a mean-ass shark who wants to chomp you.
Yeah. But it's almost like in this episode, the fear of the unknown moments, the like, we don't, all those unknown things are things that like, this is Starfleet. They would want to explore that, and they don't.
Or even the little things. Like, I love it when B'Elanna and Tom are just like trying Neelix's new coffee, and he's like, oh God, this is horrible. And she's like, it's fine to me.
Yeah.
But kind of, it's fun. Like, they have like a little fun crescendo, and they can only do that so much because it's a 45-minute episode. But
I know, and and it takes too fucking long.
yeah. But it's just like, if again, I'm kind of repeating myself, but it was more about Tom and going through this, you know, like he gets fixed at the end, but at the same time, maybe we don't need all the answers of like, oh, well, what he's doing is he's evolving, but it means de-evolving to this cave salamander, and we
didn't need that.
Yeah,
we didn't need the the theory about like early EMH, who is very abrasive and
Yes.
and
Wake up, Lieutenant.
Honestly, I mean, those were some of my favorite moments in the episode. But saying like, I think I know what's happening, and he's evolving, like that whole thing. Like I could have done without all of that explanation because it weakened everything. Like because it took the mystery away. Like if it was the whole time, like we don't fucking know what's happening. Like we don't fucking know what happens at warp 10. Like we still don't know. Everything's insane. Like what? There are lizards now? Why? We don't know. Like that would have been better than like they're evolved.
Well, and
I think
it's great if it's just like a cautionary tale and more of a, like you said, like careful what you wish for, or the consequences of when humans try to move too fast or play God.
Yes.
It's like, it's kind of like Pandora's box sort of things where it's like some doors are just not meant to be opened, at least not now. And I think it would have been far more effective of a story if it was just they didn't know exactly what happened to Tom.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's just like, oh shit, we went to warp 10 and it was frightening. And there are some things we don't understand yet, even though it's the future and we're Starfleet.
Yeah. And they could have just left the whole Janeway thing out of it.
Oh, God.
Also, why?
Should we get to that? That was so.
Can we talk about
brought
that?
This up. I've been kind of toying with this end conversation too, but I want you to start. This segment.
So yeah, first she was like, okay, it's a captain and lieutenant relationship. She's his superior. It's weird. And Zach, my brother-in-law, said it seemed like they were trying to write. It was one of those issues with Janeway where they're trying to figure out how to write her as a progressive woman who's like, ladies initiate it too. Like it's very obviously a man writing a female, an empowering female moment for a female character, but it kind of comes across like that sounds like a dude wrote it. You know what I mean?
Oh, so that's interesting. So you guys thought that line was to empower Janeway, whereas I thought that was their way of trying to be like, he didn't rape her because she says, hey, it could have been me.
Also that. Yes.
That was like, that's the only thing that kind of starts to get them out of that territory where she's like, it could have been me. It could have been the female. And it's like, okay, well, I guess they're trying to make sure it doesn't, come across as too rapey.
Yeah, it's like okay, so they're evolving to like they've evolved past us, but they're now quadrupeds without opposable thumbs who don't have the concept of consent. And then how they just like at the end again with that conversation just sort of like brush it off and like have a laugh about it.
She is so chill. I think he's more disturbed about it than she is. She's just like, space, am I right? She is so chill.
I love how you like put your hand on your hip and you're like, space.
Well, he says something about like, I feel like something's wrong, and I just wrote, yes, something should be wrong. Like, this is very, I mean, all right, so let's put it this way. Like, obviously, it's the idea, and we don't know at what point they mate. Like, is her hair falling out? But she's like, I want to mate with you, Salamander Man.
Right, like
salamander.
How long did it take her to change? Like, Tom is already a salamander, and my brother-in-law brought this up, and he's waiting for her. They're on the planet, and she's like going through all this shit that Tom went through, like in the mud. In this swamp jungle.
Yeah, so you never get an answer to how quickly it happens to her, but also like when this mating took place.
Right.
But it is the only thing I can equate this to is if you and a good friend like both woke up and you both were drinking and were like, oh man, we hooked up.
Yeah. Which is still like,
which is still weird because I understand that he's mutating. Like, I do realize this is a sci-fi world, and he's now a monster, like, you know, almost like a B-movie monster-esque, like, I'm a salamander and I have to get a mate. Like, I totally get that. But there's also something weird about it because, I mean, I think there are people who commit crimes in general under the influence of drugs, alcohol, or like homicidal rage.
Yes.
And we don't let them off the hook for that. So it's kind of like this weird message where Janeway's just like, hey, that's okay. You are a salamander man. But at the same time, I mean, I'm not saying like Tom needs to be put in the brig. I'm just saying if you try to think of a situation even close to that in the real world, it's problematic.
Yes. And she gives him a commendation at the end instead, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about like consequences of his actions. Like he goes to this crazy fuckery. If anything, he's much more regretful about the whole situation.
Yes.
You know, he's like, oh, this didn't satisfy me on an emotional level, and what happened to me physically and what I did to my captain has horrified me. Like,
yes.
Those really should be the endpoints. And yeah, Janeway is just like, whoo, that was crazy. Here's a commendation.
It's true. I mean, honestly, to me, like, the more interesting story would be like, what does somebody do after some crazy space shit happens to them? Like, what's the process of recovery? Because in Trek, in most Star Trek, especially like, you know, TOS through Voyager, I mean, there's no recovery in almost any. There's family in TNG, but like, and there are a couple episodes of DS9, but like, there's no process of like dealing with PTSD. There's no psych eval after something like this happens with a counselor where they're like, how is everything going? Like, we're going to follow up with you on this, and like, we're going to have conversations about it. You literally turned into a lizard and then had sex with your captain. Like, produced offspring with whom you have no contact now because you abandoned them on a planet somewhere. Like, this is the interesting thing to me. Like, I want to know, what the fuck do you do after this? But this is Star Trek. So, of course, the episode ends and we never discuss it again. We will never again speak of this.
But you're so right. Like, you know, Picard turns into a Borg, which is horrible, and he has full memory of it.
Again, body horror as well.
Yes. And he's violated, and he is forced to do all these horrible things. And you know, they have an episode, like you said, family, that goes into it, but this is like, might even be more messed up than that. It's like, hey, you mutated, and like all the things you just brought up. All the things you just brought up. And just on to the next episode.
and afterwards you're like, okay, everything's fine, and I found inner peace because I realize that it's all about what I think and not about what other people think. And that's what you learn from becoming a lizard.
Right. And that's what Space Salamander transformation teaches us.
Oh, God. It's so weird. It's just so fucking weird.
I have some random notes.
Okay.
I wrote, this is before they decided B'Elanna's eyebrows needed to be thinner.
This is before a lot of things. This is before the bob. This is
Yes.
Yep. This is still Jane Austen hair time for Janeway.
Till the end, I think she's a little more casual. I think it might be half up.
Yep.
She has like a cigarette.
Yeah, right.
Like, oh,
P.S.
Crazy, Tom.
Also, then like, doesn't the doctor say like, I'm gonna keep you both in sickbay for the next 3 days? Like, they have their little conversation, and then they're just gonna be hanging out in sickbay for 3 days together. Like,
there you go.
I want to know what those 3 days were like. That's what I want. I don't need any of this other bullshit.
Right. that's the night in sickbay we want to watch.
Yes, exactly. We don't need a beagle. I just want to see what the hell is going on with Janeway and Paris.
So that was a random observation.
Yeah.
Also, I love how they do one successful holodeck test simulation, and they're just ready to go and risk not only a crewman, but a shuttle, which I feel like that's an important resource.
Right? I mean, they're stuck in the Delta Quadrant with no connection to Starfleet and the Federation. Like, they're alone, and they're just like, let's try this science experiment. It might work.
Which I realize they want to get home, but I feel like Janeway would be like, okay, guys, you're going to take a week, and you're going to try to do 100 simulations in a row perfectly before I even allow this.
Yes.
But they do one, and they're like, all right,
let's
in there.
do it.
Here we go.
Also, there was like a moment where like someone else in engineering is like, there's a phase variance in the warp field, but it should be fine.
It's natural. We put some duct tape.
I was like, this is literally your only chance. and you're like okay with this. You're okay with all of these.
I'm just thinking how long it takes like the FDA to, or like a face wash to get approved, and
right.
How many stages. We're in the middle of the coronavirus vaccine marathon, and
right.
It's like
it's gonna take a while.
And stages, and this stage, and this. There's just so much involved, so it's funny to watch this episode and just see them green light it.
Yep.
In
and like
a drop of a hat.
We're not gonna wait for a peer-reviewed study. Okay, we're not? Okay, cool. Also, that whole thing with Tom having a enzymatic imbalance and how it doesn't, it obviously wasn't the thing that caused the thing, because it happened to Janeway too, and we're assuming that she doesn't have this imbalance. So like, was that whole scene just for Tom to be like, I want to do the flight?
Yes, exactly. The only reason that happens is so that Tom has a moment to express to the viewer why it's so important that he goes, and that he has this ego, or I should say he has this insecurity.
Yeah.
That he has something to prove, damn it.
When it really totally could have been like, here's a thing that actually ends up causing the thing, and the moral could be like, you need to do your fucking research before you try something dangerous. Don't be an idiot.
Well, that's exactly what I wrote. I wrote this brain, I called it imbalance too, because I think they call it something a little more fancier. But this brain imbalance or whatever should really be the catalyst. Tom takes the risk due to ego and suffers consequences.
Yeah.
Again, I'm going back to The Fly, but that's what happens is Jeff Goldblum's character, the scientist, Rundle, he is alone, and he decides to run the machines himself, which is sort of careless, and he thinks he's got everything mapped out. And then, of course, the housefly buzzes in. And again, it's sort of like, great, you moved a little too fast, and you cut some corners, and you sort of let caution to the wind, and now you're paying the consequences. But yeah, I wrote that's like, here's something they actually could have worked with. Yeah. And again, it's not that we have to have it's just again, it's why it happened. And still just leave it to this, again, like cautionary tale. Like, maybe we don't know exactly what happened, or if it would have. I mean, you said it happened to Janeway too. So, but I think we also agreed we could just take the Janeway part out.
Could we just take that whole part out?
It really could. It really could just be he gets off the ship, they find him, and he's a full, like, if they're going to keep Cave Salamander, he's just there alone, or with other beings that have. Although that would be weird too if they just left them, but
I don't understand.
I don't know how the Prime Directive works with that.
Right? I was also thinking about that too. I was like,
me too.
Prime Directive. So there are these. They come from humans, and we're just gonna. I mean,
aren't you fucking with that planet if you leave the kids?
Exactly. Like, aren't you like technically fucking with the like whole universe in some way because because of this shit, this bullshit? Also, the babies were cute.
I like how they swim off, though. Maybe they're just like, oh, we were going to take them, but now we have to capture them. Let's just forget. I mean,
So they
teleport them,
they
but-
left the children there unsupervised for the rest of their existence because they were lazy.
We just want to go.
Oh man. Like they couldn't find him. Yeah. That also again is like another thing that would have been way more interesting. Like are we gonna investigate this are we gonna see if they are actually human in some way? Like are we gonna no. Okay, bye babies, good luck to you.
We're gonna leave some cat food here.
Right, we'll leave you some fruit snacks,
Some fresh water. Here's a bowl of water in a box.
Here's some hot pockets.
Okay, I actually wanted to ask you, you and your sister brought up the Janeway scene, but I also wanted to ask you your thoughts on the kiss me scene and interaction between Tom and Kes, because I wrote, maybe she doesn't want to kiss a mutant. Like, I like how her explanation is just like, oh, I can't go in there because of the gas. It's like,
yep,
you just don't want to.
Yep. I mean,
and she does.
My literal thoughts about that in the moment were, I feel like I've said that to someone before.
I can't.
Sorry,
I can't. Let the gas out of the force field. Sorry.
Oh my God. The next time, like one day when I'm back out in the world and if somebody ever hits on me again, I'm going to be like, I'm sorry, we can't let the gas out of the force field.
And the guy's like, I always get that line.
I just like, I'm looking for, that's what I'm looking forward to now in my future is getting to rebuff some man somewhere and confuse the shit out of him by making a reference to this episode of Star Trek Voyager so that they are left dumbfounded and I can easily get away. I like this plan. It's a good plan, I think.
And then you just teleport.
Yep. And then I just disappear and they're like, what the fuck? Oh, God. Well, yeah. There are a lot of people out there that like Voyager's not their favorite. If you're just talking about Trek, the first 4 in the franchise, Voyager tends to be ranked the lowest.
Yeah, and that's because I mean, especially once TNG took off and it was a, like a international phenomenon, and then you had Deep Space Nine, and I think a lot of people saw Voyager as sort of the beginning of the end of that thrust of Star Trek.
Yeah,
success.
the like golden era, the peak era of Star Trek in the 90s. Yeah, for sure. And I've also expressed like how I feel about this and like the writing and how like Janeway was written in this sort of very strange way where like it felt like they weren't sure what to do with her sometimes. But I do love a lot of this series, a lot. I mean, technically, out of any Star Trek series, Voyager, upwards of 80% of episodes of Star Trek Voyager pass the Bechdel test. Which, if you don't know what that is it's a test. It was a test written by author Alison Bechdel, and basically you have to pass a few rules. Is there more than one named female character? Do they have a conversation, and is that conversation about something other than a man?
I have heard of this now.
Yeah, and over 80% of Star Trek Voyager episodes pass this test. And that is just because the captain is a woman and the chief engineer is a woman. That's all you need, because every episode they have some techno babble that they got to talk about. So it's almost like it's like an example of like how simple it is to actually make this happen. And then to look at the fact that like most Hollywood movies and most TV shows do not pass this test. I think it's
such a simple criteria like that. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Because like if you think about it, on TNG, a lot of the conversations that Beverly and Deanna have are about a man, about the captain, or about Riker, or about someone that one of them is seeing. So like sometimes they have a conversation about something else, like their conversation about
taking the test, the commander.
That, or their
that's a
conversation
example.
in Remember Me, where Bev's like, am I going crazy? And Deanna's like, no, you're not. You're fine. That passes the test, you know? But like, so this series in general is, I think, very important in Star Trek, in sci-fi, and just in general because of that specifically. But I mean, I have to say that if I were to pick, excluding Code of Honor, which is the worst episode ever, if I were to pick one of my least favorite episodes of TNG and compare it to this episode is always going to be the worst.
Wow, are you saying this is worse than Code of Honor?
No, I mean excluding Code of Honor, because there is
damn.
No, because there is a special place in hell for Code of Honor. But like, I would rather watch Justice.
Oh yeah, well,
you know,
yeah, and like we talked about Justice with some friends on another podcast, but I gave the observation that Keith said he understood why this was a bad episode, but he said, I'm entertained at least. Mm-hmm. And like you said, this one kind of starts to stall and plod along. And I think there's something to be said for an episode that's not as successful, but still kind of a guilty pleasure in some way for people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is not.
For you. For Amanda, it is.
Yeah.
It's a guilty pleasure for her, but for you, it just, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I could do. No, I'm glad that we did this, and I'm glad it's over.
My thoughts on Voyager, just to kind of add to your observations, is that I like to describe Voyager as Star Trek empty calories. Which I used to describe more as like a Star Trek candy, but that seemed like a little not quite accurate. It's funny because there's two, like Star Trek TNG I can put on while I'm doing something else, because I've seen those episodes so many times. I don't have to break away,
same.
to really focus on them.
Yeah.
Voyager, the fact that they're so, again, like empty calories, it's like, it's okay if I'm distracted. That's, if that makes sense. Like, it's a different type of experience where it's like, oh, Janeway comes back to the ship and there's giant bugs who have taken over and they got to shoot him. Like, okay, it's all right. And so that's how I feel about it. For me, it's a good one to put on, because it doesn't ever get usually so deep that it needs my full attention. And, whereas like Deep Space Nine, I find, even though I've seen a lot of those episodes multiple times, I'm still at a stage where it's like, that one, I have to sit down and watch it. Unless it just happens to be one of those ones that I have seen multiple times.
Unless it's the Vulcan baseball episode.
Death to the opposition.
I will agree with you on that, especially with these early seasons of Voyager. I feel like once they get, honestly, I know that they were in some ways adding 7 of 9 to add sex appeal to the show, but I think that 7 of 9 was a great asset to the writing, and I think that they did a lot with her as a character, and I think that the series got a lot deeper once they became more of a series sort of about the Borg. But before that, it was just like, what weird shit can we get into now? We don't know, because we're in this part of space that we've never been in. And it's,
and it's interesting, because I've read that Voyager, they did use the original series as an inspiration as far as it being more of an adventure of the week.
Yeah.
They wanted to get back to that a little bit more. And, but at the same time, they still were trying to do this, we even alluded to it earlier with the guy who kind of defects to the Kazon. I was going to say Curzon.
Right. The Curzon Kazon. There's so many names in Trek that are like almost the same.
I know. Like Narek and Garrick.
Yeah.
Come on, guys.
Yeah.
Larissa and Larissa.
Come on. No. No. What was dude's name last week? It was the Vulcan dude that plays the Vulcan on Voyager.
Oh, it was like Torek
and Vorik.
Right? Yeah, it's like I just need I like to think there's just like this master list of names and people can check real quick to see if like, oh, we already did that. Okay,
yeah.
let's
change the first
name.
letter. Just change the first letter real quick. Add an R.
Yeah. Something. Give us something.
Yeah. Make the syllable a little bit different. Add an apostrophe. So in conclusion, if you've never seen Voyager, don't start with this episode. I mean, honestly, part of me wants to say don't start with any episode from the first 3 seasons of Voyager.
It broke Dan. You do not want to break your loved ones.
Broke him. He did say at the end, like, it was nice that they acknowledged that they had sex, I guess.
I guess.
I also failed to tell him that this is a bad episode, and I don't think it's a good episode.
Oh, you didn't give him any warning before you guys watched it?
I mean, I told him about it. I was like, there's body horror. It's kind of disgusting, and it's really weird. And I have to watch it today. And he was like, okay.
I know. I'm always like, Keith, Larissa, and I are recording. Like, I have to watch this. It's for work.
It's for work. It's official. It's for work. Yeah. I mean, yeah, please don't watch this episode. I mean, if you were to skip this episode, if you want to watch Voyager and you were to skip this episode, that would be fine. You're not missing anything. And you might be like rescuing yourself from wasting 45 minutes.
If anything, if you want to watch this, it is fun when you run into another Star Trek fan. And if they're talking about the Space Salamander episode, you can relate, you know?
Yeah, that's true.
That's probably the only reason, just so you can share the battle scar that is watching Threshold. But
Anyway, don't watch this episode. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. We're still like just like so over the moon that people are enjoying our podcast. We promise we'll talk about it in an episode of Star Trek in the future that's not a terrible episode. But this was very fun. I will say that talking about this episode was way more fun than watching this episode.
Yes. And I think getting our brother and sisters, thank you to Amanda and John for being willing participants in this and letting us use their thoughts for us to bounce off of. We really got a kick out of reading them and answering them.
Yay! And thank you to my brother-in-law, Zach, also for putting up with this. And also thank you, and I'm sorry, to my partner, Dan,
Yes, apologies to Zach and Dan for breaking you both.
Okay. We'll be back in a couple weeks with something new. We've got cool things on the horizon. We've got cool things across the threshold.
My hair is falling out.
Find us in the collective at intothewormhole.show, on Instagram at intothewormhole.podcast. Into the Wormhole is brought to you by We Own This Town.
It's very cute to see Patrick Stewart scared.
To see him get jumpy.
Yeah, he gets really nervous. He gets really nervous. He gets really nervous. He gets really nervous. He gets really nervous.